Welcome back to Void of Fears. Before we jump into today's story, I've got to ask for a quick favour. If you could smash that like button, drop a comment below, and hit subscribe if you haven't already. It seriously makes a huge difference. YouTube's algorithm loves that stuff, and it pushes my videos to new viewers who might dig these stories too. I really appreciate every single one of you who takes the time to do that. It means the world to me and helps keep this channel growing. Alright, enough of me rambling. Let's dive into today's story. The screen is black. A single transmission crackles through speakers, desperate, raw, the voice of a man who has seen something that broke him. Charlie, if you're hearing this, don't let them cover it up. The teeth. God, they're everywhere. The planet wasn't empty. It was feeding. Static fills the air, then silence. Forget everything you thought you knew about the universe. Our most advanced deep space probe just made a discovery so terrifying, so profound. It will change humanity's understanding of our place in the cosmos forever. Miles from any habitable zone, floating in the void, it found ancient teeth. Prepare for a story that will make you question what else is truly out there. This is The Harvest. A man in his late 30s sits in a dimly lit room behind reinforced glass. Dr. Charlie Brooks looks gaunt, hollow-eyed, older than his years. A half-empty glass of whiskey sits on the table before him. When he speaks, his voice carries the weight of someone who has seen the universe reveal its cruelest secret. I used to think we were alone, he says quietly. Now I know we're not. And I wish to God we were. Charlie begins his story. March 21, 87. He was chief xenobiologist for the deep space survey vessel Compass Rose, part of humanity's aggressive push into colonizable space. Earth was dying, slowly, but dying. Overpopulation, climate collapse, resource wars. The Colonial Expansion Initiative wasn't just exploration anymore. It was survival. Their target was Kepler 442c, a rocky planet orbiting a stable star, right in the habitable zone. Early probe scans showed it was perfect. Breathable atmosphere, manageable gravity, stable climate, abundant mineral resources. Most importantly, no signs of intelligent life, no ruins, no signals, no civilization past or present. It was going to be called New Terra. 50,000 families had already been selected for the first wave of colonization. Children were being trained. Resources allocated. This wasn't just another survey mission. This was humanity's future. Charlie describes the excitement aboard the Compass Rose. 5 years of deep space travel, and they were finally approaching their destination. The crew of 42 scientists, engineers, and support staff had become a family. They'd celebrated birthdays, marriages, even a birth during the journey. They had hope. Real hope. The kind that had been rare on Earth for decades. The kind that made people volunteer for a one-way trip across the stars. The Compass Rose achieved orbit on March 14th, 2187. Charlie was part of the first landing team, 6 people total. Him, pilot Austin Reed, a former military man who was calm under pressure, the kind of guy you wanted at the controls when things went wrong. There was botanist Nate Sullivan, only 26 but brilliant, with an infectious optimism that reminded Charlie why they were doing this in the first place. Geologist Joey Kim was pragmatic and sharp-witted, always had a cigarette, even though they were worth their weight in gold in deep space. She'd joke that if she was going to die exploring the universe, she'd at least enjoy the view with a smoke. 2 engineers rounded out the team, Tom Peterson and Linda Zhao, both veterans of 3 previous survey missions. They took the shuttle Meridian down on March 16th, just after dawn. Charlie describes the descent with an almost dreamlike quality, as if he's still trying to convince himself it was real. The planet's surface resolved from abstract concept into concrete reality, rust-red plains stretching to the horizon under a butterscotch sky. 2 small moons hung visible even in daylight, casting faint shadows across the landscape. Mountains in the distance caught the morning light, their peaks sharp and pristine, untouched by any living thing. They landed in what their scans had identified as a flat basin, geologically stable, good visibility, near what appeared to be dried riverbeds. The perfect spot for the future colony's central hub. Austin brought them down smooth as silk. The engines powered down. Through the viewport, Kepler 442c waited. I remember thinking, Charlie says, that it looked peaceful, beautiful even. Like Mars, but softer, more welcoming. Joey made some joke about buying beachfront property. Nate was already planning what earth plants might grow in the soil. We were excited. We thought we'd found paradise. He takes a drink. We were wrong. The team spent the first day setting up equipment, taking atmospheric readings, collecting soil samples. Everything confirmed the preliminary data. Temperature averaged 65 degrees. Air was thin, but breathable, like being at high altitude on Earth. No toxins detected, no harmful radiation, no biological threats. The soil was rich in minerals, slightly alkaline, but easily treatable. Tom found deposits of rare earth elements within the first hour. Linda confirmed the dried riverbeds showed recent water flow, recent meaning within the last 1,000 years, which in geological terms was yesterday. Everything pointed to a world that had once been more hospitable and could be made so again. It was perfect. Too perfect, Joey said that first night around the portable heater. Nobody laughed at her joke. It was on day 2, March 18th, that Joey found it. She'd wandered about half a mile from the landing site, marking potential drill locations for mineral surveys. Her voice came over the radio, confused rather than alarmed. "Hey Charlie, can you come take a look at something? I don't know what this is." Charlie hiked out to her position, Nate following close behind. Joey was standing in a shallow depression, staring at something jutting from the ground at an odd angle. At first glance, it looked like weathered stone, pale, smooth, curved like a monument, erected by wind and time. But when Charlie got closer, his training kicked in, and his stomach dropped. The surface had the distinct luster of enamel. The shape, though massive and distorted, was unmistakable. The root structure visible where it emerged from the soil was organic, complex, biological. It was a tooth, a molar specifically, approximately 8 feet tall, 3 feet wide at its base. "I've seen dinosaur teeth," Charlie explains. "I've studied megafauna fossils from a dozen different worlds. This was different. The size was impossible. But more than that, the geometry was wrong. It curved in ways that made my depth perception fail. When I tried to trace its outline with my eyes, I'd lose track of where one surface ended and another began. The shadows it cast didn't match its physical form. Looking at it made my head hurt, like my brain was trying to process something it wasn't designed to understand." Nate arrived, then Austin, then the engineers. They stood in a circle around it, this impossible biological monument, trying to process what they were seeing. "What the hell did this come from?" Austin asked. Nobody had an answer. Joey pulled out a cigarette with shaking hands and lit it, taking a long drag. "Whatever it was," she said, "I don't want to meet it." They documented the tooth extensively, took samples from multiple points along its surface, ran every analysis their portable equipment allowed. The results were consistent but baffling. Organic material, carbon-based, definitely biological. The enamel structure matched vertebrate teeth from Earth, but scaled up enormously and altered in ways that suggested either extreme evolutionary pressure or deliberate engineering. Age testing suggested it was approximately 45,000 years old, give or take a few millennia. But here's what disturbed Charlie most. The tooth was pristine. No weathering, no erosion, no damage despite sitting exposed to the elements for 45,000 years. The surface was as smooth and intact as if it had been grown yesterday. It was as if something had preserved it deliberately, maintained it, kept it perfect for some unknown purpose. That afternoon, Austin did a flyover in the shuttle, scanning a 5-mile radius from their camp with every sensor they had. His voice came crackling over the radio 30 minutes into the flight, flat and professional, but with an undercurrent of unease that made Charlie's skin prickle. "Charlie, you're going to want to see this. All of you." The aerial footage showed 19 more teeth scattered across the landscape. Some stood alone like solitary gravestones. Others clustered in groups of 3 or 4, like families huddled together. They dotted the basin in what appeared to be a random distribution, white markers against red earth, each one casting those wrong, impossible shadows. Joey studied the footage back at camp that evening, plotting coordinates on their geographic overlay. She worked in silence for nearly an hour, cross-referencing elevation data, mineral deposits, and electromagnetic readings. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, almost reverent with dread. "They're not random. Look at the spacing. Look at the arrangement." She pulled up the overlay and highlighted each tooth location. They formed a rough circle, approximately 3 miles in diameter, perfect enough to be deliberate, irregular enough to seem natural at first glance. And at the exact center of that circle, marked with a pulsing red dot on the display, was their landing site, their camp, the spot they'd chosen as the future heart of humanity's first colony on New Terra. Charlie describes the feeling that settled over the camp that night. Not quite fear, not yet. More like the unease you feel when you realize you've made a mistake but can't quite identify what it is. The sense that they'd stumbled into something they didn't understand, that they'd been invited without knowing it, that they'd walked into a room and the door had closed softly behind them. Nate tried to lighten the mood, joking that maybe this was an ancient alien graveyard, that they'd just found God's own pet cemetery, that at least the neighbors were quiet. Nobody laughed. Tom and Linda volunteered to take first watch, even though there was nothing to watch for. Joey smoked 3 cigarettes in an hour. Austin checked and rechecked the shuttle's systems, making sure they could leave at a moment's notice. "We should have left then," Charlie says, his voice distant. "We should have gotten back in the shuttle and returned to the compass rose, reported what we'd found and let someone else figure it out. But we didn't, because we were scientists, because we were curious, because we thought we were safe, because 50,000 families were counting on us to do our jobs." He looks directly at the camera. "We were wrong about that too." The mission parameters changed overnight. The Colonial Expansion Initiative couldn't send 50,000 people to a planet with unexplained megafauna, extinct or otherwise. The corporate executives were very clear: determine what creature the teeth belonged to, assess any potential threats, and do it quickly. Delays cost money. Uncertainty cost more. Charlie's team was ordered to investigate further, to dig deeper, literally. On March 21st, they began excavation around the closest tooth, the one Joey had found. The plan was simple: dig down along the route, find the rest of the skull, identify the species, file a report, and move on. Simple, straightforward, safe. 3 feet into the dig, they hit something unexpected. A layer of hardened material, dark amber in color, stretching horizontally underground like a false floor. It wasn't rock. It wasn't soil. It wasn't anything their scanners could properly classify. When Nate carefully extracted a sample and ran it through their analyzer, the composition came back as organic, some kind of resin or secretion, ancient but still remarkably intact, with a molecular structure that seemed to resist decay at a fundamental level. Joey deployed the ground-penetrating radar and spent 2 hours analysing the results. When she showed Charlie the readings, her hands were shaking. The resin layer extended for hundreds of meters in every direction, forming an underground network of channels and chambers. It was vast, complex, and absolutely artificial. They used sonic drills to penetrate the resin. The work was slow, careful, scientific. When they finally broke through at 3 in the afternoon, on March 22nd, Charlie describes the smell that rose from below. Sweet and cloying, like rotting flowers, mixed with something chemical and wrong. Something that made his sinuses burn and his eyes water. Something that smelled organic but not natural, like a laboratory accident left to fester for millennia. The tooth's root didn't end at the resin layer. It continued down into darkness, and when Charlie shined his light into the opening, he could see it descending far beyond the range of his beam, disappearing into depths that shouldn't exist in a 3-foot excavation. They set up a secure excavation site that took the rest of the day. Lighting rigs, safety equipment, communication lines. Austin rigged a winch system using the shuttle's external crane, testing it multiple times to make sure it would hold their weight. On March 23rd, at 10:30 in the morning under a cloudless amber sky, Charlie and Joey descended into the shaft they'd opened. They wore full exploration suits with integrated lights, cameras, and air supply. Every precaution, every safety measure. It wouldn't be enough. The root of the tooth extended down approximately 200 feet through a vertical tunnel that shouldn't exist. The walls weren't natural rock. They had texture, organic ridges that ran in spiraling patterns, almost like the inside of a throat mid-swallow. The surface felt waxy when Charlie touched it, slightly warm despite the cool air, and it seemed to pulse faintly under his gloved fingers. At 200 feet, the tunnel opened into a chamber, and Charlie's voice grows quiet as he describes it, as if speaking too loudly might somehow bring it back. The chamber was huge, roughly 80 feet across, maybe 30 feet high, carved from that same waxy material. The walls curved organically, without angles, without seams, as if the entire space had been grown rather than built. And covering every surface, walls, floor, ceiling, were teeth. Hundreds of them. Thousands maybe. Different sizes, different shapes, different stages of growth. Some were tiny, barely larger than Charlie's thumb. Translucent white buds just beginning to form. Others were enormous, 6 or 7 feet long, fully developed molars, and incisors and canines that belonged to no anatomy Charlie had ever studied. They jutted from the walls at odd angles, overlapping each other, creating a grotesque forest of enamel that seemed to grow denser the deeper into the chamber you looked. It was like standing inside a mouth, Charlie says, but a mouth that was never meant to exist. The anatomy didn't make sense, no jaw structure, no skull, no organization. Just this cavity, lined with teeth growing from every direction, growing into each other, growing in patterns that hurt to perceive, and all of them perfect. Not a single cavity, not a single crack, not a single imperfection. Whatever made this place took care of its garden. Joey took samples from multiple teeth, working with mechanical precision, even though Charlie could see her breathing fast inside her helmet. His own hands were shaking so badly he had to brace his arms to keep the camera steady. The analysis revealed something that transformed their unease into genuine dread. The teeth weren't all the same age. Some were ancient, 50,000 years old or more, but others were younger. Some were only a few thousand years old. Some appeared to be just a few centuries old, some were decades old, and some, according to Joey's equipment, were still growing, active, alive. Over the next 3 days, they explored, and each chamber they found was worse than the last. The first chamber, wasn't isolated. It connected to other chambers through narrow passages, also lined with teeth, some so thick with growth that they had to crawl through gaps barely wide enough for their bodies. The passages branched and rebranched, forming a vast underground network that seemed to extend in every direction. They mapped it using drones equipped with cameras and lights, watching the footage in horrified silence as the machines flew through mile after mile of identical chambers. Every one was the same. Walls of waxy material, forests of teeth, that sweet, rotting smell. The network wasn't random, it was deliberate, organized, efficient, like a farm, like a garden designed to maximize yield. Nate found the scratch marks on the evening of March 25th in a chamber approximately half a mile from their original entry point. Deep gouges in the waxy surface clustered near what might have been an exit. They looked deliberate, desperate, carved by something with fingers or claws. He photographed them extensively, spending nearly an hour documenting every mark from multiple angles. The patterns repeated, similar symbols, similar arrangements, but he couldn't make sense of the language. It wasn't any human script, or if it was, it had degraded beyond recognition. That night, reviewing the photos, Joey thought she recognized some of the symbols. Old symbols, ancient languages she'd seen in museums. But that was impossible. Humans had never been to this planet before. The records were clear. Kepler 442c had been discovered 6 months ago. No prior missions, no secret expeditions. The data was conclusive. On March 26th, in a chamber that looked exactly like all the others, Austin made the discovery that changed everything. He found the body, and at first he thought it was another strange formation, another trick of the waxy walls. But then he got closer and realized it was human. Male, approximately 30 years old. The preservation was remarkable, the cool, dry conditions, and perhaps something about the waxy chamber walls had mummified him naturally. His skin was leathery, pulled tight over his skull, the color of old parchment. His eyes were gone, leaving dark hollows that seemed to watch them anyway. But his expression remained, frozen in his final moment. Terror. Absolute, overwhelming terror. His mouth was open in a scream that had lasted 35 years. He was wearing a spacesuit, old model, outdated technology, the kind they'd stopped manufacturing decades ago. The name patch read Morrison in faded letters. The mission patch was for the Pathfinder Initiative, one of humanity's early deep space programs from the 2140s. But that was impossible. Charlie's mind raced through the possibilities, trying to find an explanation that made sense. The Pathfinder Initiative had never sent a mission to Kepler 442c. Their probes had barely made it past Jupiter before funding dried up, and the program was cancelled. This man shouldn't exist. He couldn't exist. And yet there he was, lying on his side in a chamber that had been sealed for 45,000 years, according to their dating, in a place that humans supposedly had never visited. Austin rolled the body carefully onto its back, and Charlie heard Joey's sharp intake of breath over the radio. Morrison's mouth was propped open, jaw locked in that eternal scream. And inside, growing from his tongue, his palate, the back of his throat like obscene fruit, were dozens of small teeth. White, perfectly formed, clearly not human. They had roots that disappeared down into Morrison's throat, probably wrapping around his spine, his windpipe, his vocal cords, as if something had planted seeds in his mouth and waited for them to grow, as if Morrison himself had been the soil. Charlie described standing in that chamber, staring at Morrison's body, trying to process what he was seeing, while his mind rejected every conclusion. Joey was pale inside her helmet, breathing too fast, on the edge of panic. Austin just kept shaking his head, saying, No, this isn't right," over and over, like a prayer or a denial or both. Tom and Linda had stayed on the surface as safety monitors, and their voices came through the radio asking what was wrong, what had they found, should they abort. Nobody answered. Nobody knew what to say. Nate was the one who found Morrison's datapad, still attached to his belt by a corroded clip. The screen was cracked, spiderwebbed with damage, but when Nate powered it on using their universal adapter, the device hummed to life. Most of the files were corrupted, eaten by time and decay, but some remained. Personal logs, mission reports, and one final recording, dated August 15th, 2152, 35 years ago. Impossible, but there it was, time-stamped and authenticated and undeniable. They brought the datapad back to surface camp as the sun set on their 6th day on Kepler 442c. That night, gathered in the shelter with the heater humming and the wind whistling outside, they listened to Morrison's final recording. Charlie describes it in detail because he's listened to it hundreds of times since, because he hears it in his dreams, because Morrison's voice is burned into his memory like a brand. The man's voice was raspy, painful, like speaking cost him everything. Each word seemed to rip something inside him. Day 12 since landing. I don't know what's happening to me. Started 3 days ago, just a sore throat. Thought it was the dry air. We've been wearing the suits less, being careless, because the air tested clean, and we thought we were safe. But then I felt something moving. In my mouth, under my tongue. Like something alive, something foreign, something that didn't belong. This morning, I looked in the mirror and saw something white pushing through my gum line. It's not my tooth, it's something else, something growing inside me. I tried to pull it out with pliers, but it's rooted deep. The pain was... I couldn't do it. Static filled the recording, and they could hear Morrison's laboured breathing, wet and thick. The others are dead. All of them. Williamson went first, woke up screaming 3 days ago, teeth coming out of his eyes, pushing through his eyelids. We tried to help him, but there was nothing we could do. Then Rodriguez, then Captain Perth, then Yamamoto. They all went down into those chambers. They all breathed that air. We thought the suits were enough, but they're not. I think there's something in the air down there, something microscopic. Seeds or spores or eggs. Gets inside you when you breathe, plants itself, starts growing, using you as soil. A long pause. When Morrison spoke again, his voice was barely recognizable, thick and wet, speaking around something in his mouth. I can feel them in my throat now, pushing up, multiple growths spreading fast. It hurts to swallow, hurts to breathe, hurts to exist. They're growing exponentially. The roots. I can feel the roots spreading inside me, wrapping around something in my chest, around my heart, I think, around my lungs, squeezing. I tried to pull one out yesterday, but it's attached to everything. It's become part of me, or I've become part of it. I don't know anymore. Morrison's breathing had become a gurgling wheeze. If anyone finds this, don't open your mouth down there. Don't breathe deep. Seal your suits completely. They're sleeping in those chambers, those spores or seeds or whatever they are, waiting in the air, in the walls, in the teeth themselves maybe. The whole planet is a trap, a garden, and we're the soil. We're what they plant in. They use us to grow more teeth and then something harvests them. I found writings on the walls, warnings in languages I don't recognize. This has happened before, many times, many species. We're just the latest crop. Static and a sound like choking. Tell my wife. Tell Sarah I'm sorry. Tell her I tried to come home. Tell her I love her. And I'm sorry and I... A sound like Morrison trying to breathe through water. The teeth are in my lungs now. I can feel them growing in my lungs. I can't. The recording ended with a wet, final sound that nobody in the shelter wanted to identify. Silence filled the camp. The kind of heavy silence that presses down on you, that makes you aware of your own breathing, your own throat, your own mouth. Charlie describes the panic that followed. They ran tests on themselves immediately. Blood work, scans, everything their portable equipment could manage. All came back clean. Oxygen saturation normal. No foreign bodies detected. No anomalies. But Morrison's symptoms had started days after exposure. How long did they have? Had they already been infected? Were the spores already inside them, dormant, waiting? Austin wanted to abort the mission immediately, get back to the Compass Rose and quarantine themselves, burn their clothes, irradiate the shuttle. Joey agreed emphatically, already packing equipment, but Nate argued they needed to know more. How the infection spread, what triggered it, if there was any way to treat it, what the incubation period was. They couldn't just run. 50,000 families were counting on them. Humanity was counting on them. Charlie made the call, and he's regretted it every day since. They'd give it 48 hours. Minimal exposure to the underground chambers. Full protective gear, sealed suits, filtered air, no skin exposure, no chances. They'd collect more data, try to understand what they were dealing with, find out if treatment was possible, then evacuate and report everything. The Colonial Expansion Initiative needed to know the truth, needed to understand the danger. 50,000 lives depended on making the right call, and they couldn't make that call without more information. It was logical, it was responsible, it was scientific. I thought we were being careful, Charlie says. I thought we could control it. I thought knowledge would protect us. I was wrong about that too. On March 28th at breakfast, Nate complained of a sore throat. Just mentioned it casually, reaching for water, saying the dry air was getting to him. Everyone froze. Joey dropped her coffee. Austin stood up so fast he knocked over his chair. Nate laughed, said it was probably nothing. Just the air quality, just stress, just his imagination. But they all knew. They'd all heard Morrison's recording. They knew exactly what it meant. The symptoms progressed exactly as Morrison had described, with the mechanical inevitability of a disease following its programmed course. Day 1, sore throat, mild discomfort, easily dismissed. Day 2, difficulty swallowing, sensation of something foreign in the mouth, a persistent feeling of fullness in the throat. Day 3, the first tooth emerged, and everything became real in the worst possible way. Charlie describes watching it happen because he has to, because bearing witness is all he has left. Nate was in the medical bay, sedated but conscious, because the sedatives didn't work properly, as if the infection somehow metabolized them or neutralized them. Charlie stood on the other side of the glass partition and watched the small white point pushing up through Nate's tongue, not erupting through existing tissue but growing from inside like a plant breaking through soil, like something planted deliberately. The tongue tissue parted around it almost willingly, as if making room, as if this was natural and expected. Within hours, there were more. 3 teeth along his gum line where no teeth should be. 2 more on the roof of his mouth. 1 pushing through his soft palate. Nate couldn't speak anymore. His tongue was swelling around the growths, filling his mouth with foreign tissue. His eyes were wide, terrified, pleading with Charlie to do something, anything, to make it stop. But there was nothing. Nothing to do but watch and document and hope they could learn something that might save the others. The ship's medical officer, Dr. Rachel Vance, tried everything in her considerable arsenal. Surgical removal was impossible. The roots were already deep, intertwined with blood vessels and nerves, in ways that made extraction fatal. She tried once, carefully, to remove a single tooth from Nate's gum line. The bleeding was catastrophic. The roots had wrapped around his facial artery. Extraction would have killed him in minutes. Radiation therapy killed the growths but nearly killed Nate in the process, and new teeth started growing within hours, faster than before, as if the radiation had somehow stimulated them. Antiparasitic drugs had no effect. Antibiotics had no effect. Antifungals had no effect. Nothing in their medical database addressed an infection like this. It wasn't a parasite. It wasn't a virus. It wasn't anything that behaved like any organism they understood. The worst part, Charlie says, his voice breaking for the first time, was that Nate stayed conscious through all of it. He was aware. He was present. He could feel every tooth breaking through, every root spreading, every moment of invasion. We tried to sedate him more heavily, but the growth seemed to respond to the drugs. They'd accelerate, pushing through faster, as if they were feeding on whatever we gave him. Or maybe they sensed the threat and hurried to complete their life cycle before we could stop them. I don't know. I don't know anything anymore. By March 30th, teeth were erupting from Nate's face, small white points breaking through his cheeks from the inside, pushing through the skin near his jawline, emerging from his forehead like obscene horns. One pushed up through the corner of his eye socket, and they had to watch as it slowly displaced his eye, pushing the organ aside with terrible patience. Nate tried to scream but couldn't. His throat was full of roots and teeth and growth. He could only make wet, gurgling sounds that were somehow worse than screaming. He died on March 31st at 2:17 in the afternoon. The official cause of death was asphyxiation. The teeth had filled his throat completely, blocking his airway like a cork in a bottle. But Dr. Vance's autopsy revealed the real extent of the horror, and Charlie describes it with clinical detachment, because that's the only way you can tell it without breaking completely. The roots had infiltrated everything. They'd wrapped around Nate's heart like strangling vines, threaded through his lungs like parasitic branches, penetrated his brain in delicate filaments that followed his neural pathways. The growths weren't just teeth. They were an entire organism, complex and sophisticated, using Nate's body as scaffolding, as structure, as support. The teeth were just the visible part, the fruit of something vast and hidden. He wasn't dying of an infection, Dr. Vance told Charlie afterward, her voice hollow with shock. He was being replaced, transformed. His body was being converted into something else, into more of them. Within 72 hours of Nate's death, 3 more crew members showed symptoms. Joey was the first, waking up on April 2nd with a sore throat she tried to hide but couldn't. Then, Tom Peterson, one of the engineers who'd helped with the excavation. Then Austin, and that broke something in Charlie because Austin had been so careful, had worn his suit properly, had followed every protocol. If Austin could be infected, they all could be. They probably all were. Charlie describes Joey's progression with clinical detachment, cataloguing symptoms like a scientist rather than a friend. Because if he thinks about Joey as a person, as the woman who made him laugh during the long years of deep space travel, who taught him to play poker, who'd shown him pictures of her brother's kids and talked about teaching them to explore the stars someday, he'll fall apart. The sore throat on day 1, the first tooth on day 3, pushing through her lower lip from the inside. By day 5, she couldn't eat. Food wouldn't pass through the forest of teeth filling her mouth. By day 7, she couldn't speak. Her last communication was written on a datapad with shaking hands. Tell my brother I love him. Tell him I'm sorry I won't meet his kids. Don't let anyone else come to this planet. Burn it. Burn it all. Don't let anyone else die like this. She died on April 4th, teeth erupting from her throat, her ears, the corners of her eyes. She died drowning in enamel, in foreign growth, in something that should never have existed inside a human body. Tom Peterson went faster. The infection was more aggressive in him, or perhaps his immune system fought harder, accelerating the growth in some terrible feedback loop. Teeth erupted not just from his mouth but from his entire body, punching through his fingertips like white claws, erupting from his chest in clusters, pushing through his scalp until his head looked like some kind of grotesque crown. He lasted 4 days. 4 days of agony that no amount of morphine could touch. He died screaming, or trying to scream, around the teeth filling his mouth. Austin lasted the longest. Maybe because he'd had the least exposure, or maybe just luck, or maybe because he was stubborn and refused to give up even when his body was betraying him. He stayed coherent longer than the others, helped Charlie and Dr. Vance collect data, documented his own symptoms with excruciating detail, made recordings describing what he felt, what it was like, how the growth progressed. "We have to warn Earth," Austin told Charlie on April 8th, his voice slurred and wet around the teeth filling his mouth, blood trickling from where new growths had torn through his gums. "The Colonial Initiative has to know. If they send those families, if they land here without knowing, we have to stop them. That's all that matters now. We have to make sure we're the last ones." He didn't finish the sentence. A tooth pushed through his tongue, and he bit down on it reflexively by instinct. The crack was audible, the sound of enamel breaking, and Austin's eyes went wide with pain and horror and understanding that this was how it would end. He died that night, quietly, while Charlie sat beside him through the glass partition. Just stopped breathing. Gave up, maybe. Or perhaps the teeth had finally reached something vital. Charlie doesn't know which would be worse. By April 10th, 7 crew members were dead. 3 more were showing early symptoms: the sore throat, the difficulty swallowing, the feeling of something foreign. The Compass Rose was under complete quarantine. No one in, no one out. Every compartment sealed. Charlie had sealed the healthy crew members in the forward compartments, separated from the infected by emergency bulkheads and 3 layers of decontamination protocol. But it didn't matter. None of it mattered because the infection was already everywhere. Dr. Vance, working in full isolation gear, made the breakthrough on April 12th. She'd been analysing the spores found in the underground chambers, microscopic particles barely visible even under their strongest microscopes, that could drift through air currents, settle in lungs, wait. The spores weren't random biological weapons. They were incredibly sophisticated, more complex than anything Earth had ever produced. Once inhaled, they remained dormant for days, maybe weeks, evading immune response by masquerading as inert particles, as dust, as nothing. The human body didn't recognize them as threats, didn't attack them, just let them settle into lung tissue and wait. Then, triggered by some unknown factor, maybe temperature, maybe pH levels in human tissue, maybe time itself, they activated. They grew root systems first, anchoring deep in the host's body, with hair-thin filaments that spread through tissue like cracks through glass. Only after establishing structural support did they begin growing teeth, using the host's own body as nutrients, as raw material, converting human tissue into enamel and root with terrible efficiency. "It's agriculture," Dr. Vance explained to Charlie in the medical bay, surrounded by bodies of their colleagues. "We're not hosts. We're not even victims. Not really. We're gardens. The spores plant themselves in us, use our bodies as soil, and grow teeth. Perfect teeth. Pristine teeth. Valuable teeth. The question is, why teeth? What's harvesting them? What finds them so valuable that it seeds entire planets with this thing?" Charlie had been studying Morrison's datapad obsessively, cross-referencing it with the scratch marks Nate had found in the chambers, using every linguistic database they had. With Vance's help, working late into the night while more crew members died around them, he made a translation. The marks weren't random, they were warnings left by previous victims in what appeared to be dozens of different languages, some human, some not. The messages repeated the same themes across cultures, across species, across time. Don't breathe the air. Seal your mouth. The planet is a trap. They're growing beneath the surface. Run while you can. They're coming to harvest. But one message was longer, more detailed, carved deeply into the wall, as if the writer had spent their last strength on it. It took Charlie 3 days to fully translate it, working through pain and fear and the growing soreness in his own throat that he tried to ignore. When he finished, when he understood what it said, the implications were staggering. The message claimed the teeth weren't from creatures that had lived on the planet. They weren't fossils. They weren't remains. They were placed here deliberately, planted like seeds. The entire underground network, the chambers, the tunnels, the forests of teeth, all of it was artificial. A trap designed to infect explorers from any species capable of space travel. A trap that had worked hundreds of times, thousands maybe, over tens of thousands of years. They seed planets like this, the message read in halting, desperate words, habitable worlds, but just outside the ideal zone, barren enough to seem safe, empty enough to investigate, viable enough to colonize. They put the teeth underground and wait centuries, wait millennia. Eventually someone comes. Someone always comes. When they land, when they dig, when they explore, the spores release. The visitors breathe, the visitors die. The teeth grow from their bodies, using them as soil, as nutrients, as raw material. And every few thousand years they come back. They harvest. They collect the teeth like crops, like fruit, like treasure. I don't know what they use them for. I don't know what they are. I only know they're patient. So patient. And we're just food, just soil, just another harvest. The message ended with a simple plea. Carved so deeply, the writer must have been pushing with all their weight. Run. If you can still run, do it. If you can still breathe, get off this world. Don't let them harvest you too. Don't let your body become their garden. Run. Charlie describes the meeting he held with the remaining healthy crew on April 13th. 15 people left out of 42. Dr. Vance, though she'd later admit her spore count was climbing. The shuttle pilots, engineers, support staff, young people who'd signed up for a 5-year mission with dreams of being part of humanity's future, of building something new, of escaping Earth's slow death. People with families waiting for them. People with lives they'd put on hold. He gave them the choice, laid out all the options even though there weren't many. They could return to Earth, quarantine themselves, hope the infection could be contained or cured. Or they could send the data to Earth immediately, warning the colonial initiative about the planet, even though doing so would mean violating their corporate contracts, facing criminal charges, possible imprisonment, financial ruin. The crew voted unanimously, send the warning, save the 50,000 families scheduled for colonization. Some things were more important than careers or contracts or even their own lives. They couldn't let this happen to anyone else. Couldn't let 50,000 people land on this world and breathe its air and die its death. Charlie sent the transmission on April 12th at 6:30 in the evening as the sun set on Kepler 442c for what he thought would be the last time. Every file, every recording, every piece of evidence. He included Morrison's logs, the translated warnings, Dr. Vance's analysis, and footage of the dead crew members. Graphic, horrifying, undeniable proof that this planet was death. He encrypted it all and sent it through official channels, through emergency channels, through every channel he could access. Then he waited. The message took 9 hours to reach Earth. The response came back 6 hours after that. The Colonial Expansion Initiative confirmed receipt of the data. They acknowledged the severity of the situation. They were sending military vessels to enforce quarantine. They were suspending all colonization of Kepler 442c pending further investigation. They were launching inquiries into how Morrison's 2152 mission had remained classified, how an entire expedition had been lost without public knowledge. And they informed Charlie in cold corporate language that his contract violation would result in criminal prosecution, confiscation of assets, and permanent revocation of his scientific credentials. They thanked him for his service and informed him that he was terminated, effective immediately. "I didn't care," Charlie says. "We'd saved those families. That's what mattered. That was worth everything." But then Dr. Vance came to him with new test results, and the universe found one more way to break him. Charlie's voice becomes hollow as he describes this part, as if the words are being pulled from somewhere deep inside him, somewhere that still hurts. Dr. Vance had been running tests on everyone daily, looking for any sign of infection, monitoring spore counts, tracking progression. The spore count in her own lungs had been climbing steadily. She'd known for 3 days she was infected. She just hadn't told anyone because there was work to do, because people needed her, because knowing wouldn't change anything. On April 14th, she showed Charlie the results for the entire crew. All 15 of the healthy survivors showed spore presence. Every single one. Everyone who'd set foot on the planet's surface. Everyone who'd been in the underground chambers. Even people who'd only been in the landing bay when samples were brought aboard. All infected. Some had higher counts than others. Some would progress faster. But they were all dying, just at different speeds. The spores were more resilient than they'd thought. More patient, more insidious. They could survive in suit filters, in air recyclers, in equipment. They could wait dormant in lung tissue for weeks, maybe months. Some crew members had been infected during the first landing, nearly a month ago. They just hadn't activated yet, hadn't started growing, hadn't showed symptoms. But they would. Eventually, inevitably, they all would. "We're all dying," Vance told him calmly, with the clinical detachment of a doctor delivering a diagnosis. "It's just a question of when. Days for some, weeks for others, maybe months for the lucky ones. But we're all going to die here, all of us." She asked Charlie to document her progression, for science, for future researchers who might find a cure, to learn as much as possible before the end. He agreed, though it felt like a betrayal to reduce her death to data, to treat her as a specimen rather than a person. But that's what she wanted. That's all she could do now. Contribute to knowledge, leave something behind, make her death mean something. She developed symptoms on April 16th. The familiar sore throat, the difficulty swallowing. The first tooth appeared on April 19th, pushing through her lower gum line. Charlie watched through the glass partition and documented everything. Took notes, made recordings, did his job even as his friend died. She lasted 5 days, longer than some, shorter than others. Died on April 24th with teeth growing from her throat, her ears, the corners of her eyes. Her last words, written because she could no longer speak, were shaky but clear. "At least we warned them. At least we did that. At least 50,000 people won't die like this. That has to be enough. That has to matter." The remaining crew members died over the next 6 weeks. Charlie describes it methodically, like reading a casualty list, because that's the only way he can do it, the only way he can speak their names without breaking down. Emma Reeves, shuttle pilot, died May 2nd. Colin Hughes, engineer, died May 8th. Patricia Okonkwo, botanist, died May 12th. David Park, systems analyst, died May 19th. On and on. Names and dates. Each one a person he'd worked with, laughed with, shared 5 years of deep space travel with. Each one someone's child, someone's spouse, someone's friend. each one reduced to another body in the Compass Rose's morgue, another victim of humanity's expansion into a universe that didn't want them. By May 30th, only 3 people remained alive: Charlie, Emma's co-pilot Sarah Lindstrom, and an engineer named Marcus Webb. They all had symptoms. They all knew how this ended. The military vessels wouldn't arrive for another 6 weeks. Not fast enough, not nearly fast enough. Earth had sent messages of encouragement, promises of cutting-edge medical treatment, assurances that they'd find a cure, that they just had to hold on. Charlie knew they were lies. Well-meaning lies, the kind you tell dying people to give them hope, but lies nonetheless. There was no cure. There couldn't be. The infection was too sophisticated, too entrenched, too unlike anything human medicine had encountered. Sarah died on June 8th. Marcus lasted until June 12th, and then Charlie was alone on the Compass Rose with 41 bodies in the morgue, and the growing certainty that he'd be joining them soon. He spent his days documenting everything, organizing the data, preparing final reports, doing the work, because work was all he had left. He wanted Earth to understand exactly what had happened, what this planet was, what it meant for humanity's expansion into space. He owed his crew that much, owed their families, owed the 50,000 people they'd saved. On June 15th, while reviewing orbital scans to avoid thinking about the soreness in his throat, Charlie noticed something he'd missed before. He'd been so focused on the surface landing site, on the immediate crisis, on survival, that he'd never examined the broader planetary data, never pulled back to look at the big picture. When he did, when he expanded the scan radius and processed the ground-penetrating radar data for the entire planet, what he found made his blood run cold. The underground tunnel network they'd found wasn't isolated, wasn't unique. Ground-penetrating radar showed similar networks across the entire planet. Hundreds of them, thousands maybe. Every network had the same structure. Chambers lined with teeth, connected by passages, sealed beneath layers of that amber resin. Every network was positioned near ideal colonization sites, flat terrain, mineral deposits, water sources, as if they'd been placed deliberately to intercept explorers, to maximize encounters, to ensure that anyone landing on this planet would eventually dig in the wrong place and release the spores. Charlie ran calculations, working through the night, using every bit of processing power the Compass Rose had. Based on the distribution patterns and the age of the teeth they'd sampled, accounting for variation and decay, he estimated there were approximately 18 million individual teeth scattered across Kepler 442c, 18 million specimens, 18 million potential infection sites, and if each tooth represented a death, if the teeth were, as the warning suggested, grown from the bodies of previous visitors, using them as soil and nutrients, then Kepler 442c had killed 18 million beings over its history. 18 million explorers from God knows how many species, all arriving with hope, all dying in agony, all converted into crops for something patient and vast and utterly alien. "It's not a planet," Charlie says, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's a graveyard, a farm, a harvest world. Someone created this place deliberately, seeded it with those spores, built those chambers, arranged it all like a trap. And then they waited for species like us to develop space travel, to start exploring, to come looking for new worlds. And when we did, when we landed and dug and breathed, we did exactly what they wanted. We became the soil. We grew their crops. We participated in our own harvest." On June 19th, Charlie's symptoms accelerated. He woke to find 3 teeth pushing through his tongue, small white points that hurt worse than anything he'd ever felt. Movement was agony. Breathing was difficult. Speaking was nearly impossible. He had days left, maybe a week at most. He recorded his final message that morning, forcing the words out around the teeth filling his mouth. His voice was distorted, wet, barely understandable. But he needed Earth to hear this, needed someone to know. "I don't know who created this place," he said, each word an act of will. "I don't know if they're still out there, still harvesting, still tending their gardens. But I know this, they understand us. They understand how we think, how we explore, how we expand. They know we look for habitable planets. They know we send teams to investigate before colonization. They know our patterns, our behaviors, our desperation. They designed this trap specifically for species like us. Patient species, curious species, desperate species looking for new homes." He paused, struggling to breathe around the growing teeth, feeling roots spreading through his chest. The Colonial Initiative has identified 4,000 potentially habitable planets in our expansion zone. They're planning to send teams to all of them over the next 50 years. But how many are like this one? How many are just waiting, baited traps disguised as new worlds? How many are harvest worlds designed to kill us and convert us into something they can use? We can't stop exploring. Earth needs new worlds to survive. But we need to change how we do it. Send robots first. Extensive remote analysis. Never set foot on a surface until we're absolutely certain it's safe. And even then, we might miss something. We might walk into another trap. Because whoever created this place, they're smarter than us. More patient. More experienced. They've been doing this for thousands of years, maybe millions. We're just the latest species to stumble into their garden. I'm the last one alive on the Compass Rose. By the time the military vessels arrive, I'll be dead. I'll be another body in the morgue. Another tooth in someone's harvest. Don't land. Don't board this ship. Everything here is contaminated. Scuttle it remotely. Burn it in the atmosphere. Make sure nothing gets back to Earth. And whatever you do, never send anyone back to Kepler 442c. Don't try to study it. Don't try to understand it. Don't try to weaponize it or control it or learn from it. Just mark it as forbidden and stay away. Some places aren't meant for humans. Some places are designed to be our graves. This is one of them, and there are more out there. I know there are, waiting, patient, ready for the next curious species to come looking for a new home. The recording ended with the sound of Charlie choking, trying to breathe through teeth and roots and growth. But the screen doesn't fade, because that wasn't the end. Charlie is still here, still speaking, still looking at the camera from behind reinforced glass. The scene shifts, resolves, and we understand. We're back in the present. The quarantine facility. The interview room that's not an interview room. Charlie sits alone in his sterile white cell. And when he speaks, his voice is clearer now, stronger, but carrying a weight that will never leave. That message was recorded 11 months ago, he says. The military vessels arrived on July 3rd, 2187. They found me still alive. Barely, but alive, they didn't know how. Statistically, I should have been dead. The infection had progressed. Teeth were growing. But I was still breathing, still conscious, still functioning. He opens his mouth, pulls his lower lip down. The inside of his mouth is covered in small white scars where teeth were removed, surgically, repeatedly, constantly. They'd developed a treatment while I was dying alone on the Compass Rose. Not a cure. There's no cure. There can never be a cure. But a suppression therapy. Massive doses of targeted radiation, combined with immune boosters and constant surgical removal of new growths. The radiation kills active spores and slows growth. The immune boosters help my body fight the infection. And every 3 days, I have surgery to remove new teeth before they can root too deeply. I'll need these treatments for the rest of my life, however long that is. Days, years, decades, I don't know. Nobody knows. I'm the first person to survive this infection. The only person. I'm a medical miracle and a living cautionary tale. I'm the only survivor from the Compass Rose. 41 people died. Good people. Brilliant people. People with families waiting for them back on Earth. Families who'd said goodbye 5 years ago and were expecting to say hello again. People with children who'll grow up without parents. People with dreams of building humanity's future among the stars. All dead. All converted into teeth, into crops, into someone else's harvest. Charlie looks directly at the camera, and his eyes are ancient, haunted, carrying knowledge no human should have. The Colonial Initiative suspended settlement of Kepler 442c after receiving my data, but they didn't mark it as forbidden, didn't declare it off limits. Too many questions, too much political pressure, too much corporate investment. Instead, they've designated it as under further study. Corporate speak for, we're not ready to admit we lost a $50 billion investment. They've sent 3 more research teams to study the planet, to understand the infection, to see if there's any way to salvage the colonization effort or weaponize what they found. 2 teams came back, the 3rd is overdue. I could have told them what that means. Could have told them that everyone on that 3rd team is dead or dying, being converted into soil, into gardens, into more teeth for the harvest. But they didn't ask me. They stopped asking me anything after I made my data public. And Kepler 442c isn't the only one. We've found similar underground networks on 17 other planets since I sent my warning. Some have teeth like Kepler 442c. Others have different structures, different traps. One planet has crystal formations that release spores when exposed to body heat. Another has cave systems filled with something that looks like flowers, but grows inside your brain. Each one unique, each one deadly, each one designed to kill explorers in specific ways. All of them inhabitable zones. All of them perfectly positioned to intercept colonization efforts, all of them waiting with infinite patience for the next species to arrive. Someone seeded these planets, someone intelligent, deliberate, sophisticated, someone who understands evolutionary biology, planetary science, colonization psychology. They scattered these traps across the galaxy like landmines, knowing that eventually species like us would find them. The question isn't just who did this. The question is why? What do they want with the teeth? What do they harvest them for? What use does 18 million teeth have? And more importantly, are they still watching? Are they still out there, still tending their gardens? Still waiting to see what we'll do? Are they counting the teeth we've added to their collection? He pauses and something shifts in his expression. Something darker. Something that's been growing in his mind during 11 months of isolation and surgery and survival. I've had a lot of time to think in this cell. A lot of time to process what happened, to analyze the data, to look for patterns. And I've realized something that terrifies me more than the infection, more than the teeth, more than dying. The harvest worlds aren't scattered randomly across the galaxy. They're positioned deliberately along the expansion routes of emerging spacefaring civilizations. They're placed exactly where a species would explore first after achieving interstellar travel. Habitable zone planets with promising conditions, but just empty enough to seem safe. They're filters, tests, traps designed to catch species at a specific point in their development. And here's what keeps me awake at night, what makes me wake up screaming, even after the surgery, even after the drugs. We failed the test. We landed on Kepler 442c. We dug into the soil. We breathed the air. We released the spores. We became the harvest. 41 people died, and somewhere out there something knows. Something counted those deaths. Something added those teeth to its collection. And now it knows about us. Knows about humanity. Knows we're exactly the kind of species it was designed to catch. What if the harvest worlds aren't just traps? What if they're markers? Flags to identify which civilizations are ready for something else? What if by landing on Kepler 442c, by failing the test, we've announced our presence to something vast and patient and utterly beyond our understanding? What if they're coming now, following the signal we sent by triggering their trap, coming to collect their harvest and see what other crops we might provide? Charlie stands up slowly, painfully. Through the glass, a medical team enters his quarantine cell. It's time for another surgery. Another attempt to hold back the infection that will never fully leave his body. "My name is Dr. Charlie Brooks," he says to the camera. "I'm 39 years old. I led the survey team to Kepler 442c. I was supposed to help humanity find a new home. Instead, I found proof that the universe doesn't want us here. Proof that someone else got here first and turned the galaxy into a garden, and we're the seeds they're planting. The colonial initiative says exploration will continue. They say we can't let fear stop human progress. They say Earth needs those new worlds to survive. Maybe they're right. Maybe we have no choice. But I know this. Every team that lands on a new planet, every person who takes that first breath of alien air, every explorer who digs into alien soil, they're gambling their life on the hope that the planet isn't another harvest world. They're betting that this time will be different, that this planet will be safe. And based on what we've found, based on 17 confirmed harvest worlds and counting, based on 18 million teeth on Kepler 442c alone, those aren't good odds. Those are terrible odds. But we'll keep playing anyway. Because we're desperate. Because Earth is dying. Because we have nowhere else to go. And whoever created the harvest worlds knows that. Knows we can't stop. Knows we'll keep exploring, keep landing, keep breathing, keep becoming their crops. They understand us perfectly. And that's the most terrifying thing of all. The medical team begins prepping for surgery. Charlie's voice drops to barely above a whisper, but every word carries absolute conviction. I volunteered to tell this story because people need to know. Because the families of my crew deserve to understand how they died and why. Because humanity deserves to know what's waiting for us in the stars. We're not alone in the universe. We're not safe. And we're not ready for what's out there. The teeth on Kepler 442c are still there. Still growing. Still waiting. And somewhere out there, in the vast darkness between stars, I think something is counting them. Tallying the harvest. Preparing to collect. Preparing for us. I used to dream about exploring the stars, about humanity spreading across the galaxy like we spread across Earth, building and growing and thriving. Now I dream about teeth pushing through my skin. I dream about chambers lined with enamel and the sweet smell of rot. I dream about Morrison's warning playing on loop. The whole planet is a trap, a garden, and we're the soil. I dream about the scratched warnings on the walls, written in languages that went extinct before humans existed, all saying the same thing. Run. If you can still run, do it. Morrison was right. They were all right. Every species that found those harvest worlds and lived long enough to leave a warning was trying to tell us the same thing. But we didn't listen. We couldn't listen. Because we didn't find the warnings until after we'd already breathed the air, until after we'd already released the spores, until after it was too late. And there are thousands more gardens out there waiting for the next species foolish enough to land. Maybe millions. Maybe the entire galaxy is their garden, and we're just the latest crop. Maybe that's what the universe is, a farm, and we're not the farmers. We're not even the workers. We're the harvest. We're what someone else planted long ago, and now they're coming back to collect. The screen begins to fade, but Charlie's voice continues, growing distant but no less urgent. They said the planet was uninhabited. Then we found the teeth. And now we know it wasn't uninhabited. It was cultivated. It was tended. It was waiting. And we walked right into it with hope in our hearts and dreams of a new beginning. We walked into our own grave and didn't realize it until we were already buried. Dr. Charlie Brooks remains in permanent medical quarantine at the Enceladus research station. His condition is stable but incurable. He continues to advise the Colonial Expansion Initiative on planetary safety protocols, though his recommendations are rarely followed. The Compass Rose was scuttled in deep space on August 12, 2187. All 41 crew members who died were cremated according to their families' wishes. Their ashes were not scattered in space, as is traditional, but stored in containment in case of residual infection. Kepler 442c remains under quarantine. The teeth are still growing. Biological surveys suggest the growth rate has accelerated in the year since the Compass Rose landing, as if the harvest world is preparing for something. As of January 2188, similar underground structures have been identified on 43 potentially habitable planets in humanity's expansion zone. All have been designated as high risk for colonization. None have been marked as forbidden. Colonial investment is too valuable. Corporate pressure is too strong, and humanity is too desperate for new worlds to turn away from even the dangerous ones. No one knows who created the harvest worlds. No one knows if they're still watching, still waiting, still counting. No one knows how many more are scattered across the galaxy. No one knows what they harvest the teeth for, what purpose they serve, what value they hold. No one knows what happens when they come back to collect. But Dr. Charlie Brooks knows one thing with absolute certainty. They will come back. They always do. The harvest's worlds weren't built to remain empty forever. They were built to be filled, to be cultivated, to be collected. And now, after 41 deaths, after 18 million teeth, after countless warnings, ignored across countless civilizations, Kepler 442c is ready. The garden is full. The crop has grown, and somewhere in the darkness between stars, something is preparing for harvest season. The screen goes black. In the silence, we hear one final audio clip. Charlie's voice distorted and wet and desperate from that last message recorded alone on the Compass Rose. They said the planet was uninhabited. Then we found the teeth. And then the teeth found us. And then we understood. We were never the explorers. We were never the discoverers. We were always the harvest. We just didn't know it yet. Static fills the air. Then nothing but silence. The kind of silence that waits between stars. The kind of silence that listens. The kind of silence that counts. And in that silence, somewhere far from Earth, on a rust-red planet under a butterscotch sky, 18 million teeth wait in the darkness. Growing, waiting, ready. The harvest is coming. It's always coming. And humanity has just announced that the crop is ripe.